Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
It was difficult being the son of the most hated man in Westeros. Aelor Targaryen had seen his fair share of death. He'd watched the executions of the houses Darklyn and Hollard after the Defiance, a 15-year-old squire to Sir Barristan Selmy, who'd been forced to stay behind while his mentor scaled the wall of Duskendale and rescued Aelor's father. He'd killed his first man, some hulking brute who smelled like a pigsty and fought like a boar. 2 years later, during the waning hours of the Kingswood Brotherhood, and sent 7 more men to their graves before the conflict was finished, earning his knighthood. And he'd seen men burned alive by his father for years now, more men and more situations than Aelor wished to recall. His father's nickname of the Mad King was well earned, but the deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark were haunting. The smell of the Lord of the North's burning flesh still swirled in his nostrils, just as the sound of the man's son strangling himself as he tried to save his father still rang in his ears. Aelor was no stranger to nightmares, but he knew those deaths would haunt him until the day he died. If they ever find Rhaegar, I'll kill him myself. There are worse things in life than being labeled a kinslayer. My lord, came a deep, raspy voice in the hall behind him. Aelor didn't turn, his eyes finally seeing what he had been staring at since he'd stormed out of the throne room. King's Landing was breathtaking from this balcony at night, the stench of the city prevalent but easily ignored when one was gazing at the millions of lights down below. The sound of heavy footfalls drew nearer before stopping a few feet behind where Aelor leaned. I heard you the first time, Ren. Prince Aelor Targaryen sighed, running his hand through his short, silver hair. There be hell to pay now. The second son of Aerys Targaryen, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, turned to regard his best friend. Renfred Ricker, Lord of Hollard Hall, was a big man, 6.5 feet tall and broad-shouldered. His warhammer was strapped across his back, a permanent accessory to the man since he'd been big enough to wield it. Black-haired and fully bearded, he struck an imposing figure. Renfred came to lean next to his lifetime friend, arms folding across his chest. Aelor was himself big for a Targaryen, only an inch or two shorter than Ricker and nearly as broad-shouldered. His silver hair and trimmed beard paired with his dark violet eyes and classic Targaryen beauty to strike an imposing figure in his own right. They'd both only seen 20 name days, but each man felt in that moment a lifetime older. Ricker spoke first. The king has commanded Jon Arryn to surrender Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon to him. Aelor shook his head. He won't, and the 7 know. I don't blame him for it. Renfred raised an eyebrow. Do you think he will call his banners in rebellion? The prince turned to meet his friend's eyes. My father just burned the Lord Paramount of the North alive in his armor while his heir strangled himself trying to save him. All of this after my brother, heir to the throne, disregards his wife and kidnaps the man's daughter, who just so happens to be the betrothed of Robert Baratheon, Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. Aelor snorted. My family has done an excellent job of screwing things up. Yes, Jon Arryn will rebel and the North and the Stormlands will join him. Renfred nodded. So it will be war then. I don't see your father abdicating. My father hasn't done a sensible thing like that in years, old friend. Ricker glanced around. You know as well as I, your grace, the dangers of talking like that. Aelor Targaryen laughed, gaining his feet from his leaning position. Yes, the walls have ears, as they say. It is true, I have no doubt. Even now you can hear the wings of various little birds as they flap away to report on King Aerys' traitor son. Let them. My father will need me now more than ever, and even his madness won't stop him from knowing it. Aelor raised his voice louder. Sir Barristan, the knight stepped out from behind the pillar where he had been waiting, white enamel plate shining in the torchlight of the rather dark hall. Yes, your grace. Aelor walked towards his old mentor, strides long and confident, his well-muscled but lean body moving as smooth as a shadow cat. Renfred followed, his strides longer, heavier, and not nearly as graceful. We leave tonight. At this time of night, your grace. Aelor nodded, the Kingsguard knight and Lord of Hollard Hall falling into step on either side of him. Yes, we all know how my father gets after displays like today. I have no intention of hearing my mother's wails for mercy ever again. Aelor's face was hard as stone. When we reach Duskendale, send the ravens to my bannermen. We prepare for war. Duskendale was an impressive sight. It had been impressive 5 years ago when he'd rode with Tywin Lannister to besiege the city and its castle, and it was just as impressive now, even after he'd ruled it in the years since his father had granted it to him after destroying the Darklands. He was still a mile away, but he could clearly see the Dun Fort, his castle on the shore of the narrow sea. His city speared out away from it, thickly walled on the 3 sides that didn't face the ocean. Cobbled and swept streets made Duskendale an attractive city, and the trade made possible by its location on the ocean made it a prosperous one as well. Even now, galleys flying the banner of the Stormlands, Dragonstone, the Reach, and even the free cities of Pentos and Myr were docked outside the walls, being loaded or unloaded by the dockhands, their goods carried by the cartload to the traders inside the walls. Despite being born and raised in King's Landing, which made Duskendale's population of 40,000 seem minuscule, Aelor always felt a sense of pride when he saw the Targaryen banners flapping above it. It passed several fishing villages on the road, raising the levies as they went. Aelor had sent Sirs Bauman and Morgan Byach, the brothers of Lord Clayton of Byach Hall, sworn to him, as well as Sirs Manfred Dark and Gullion Elwood to the surrounding villages. Duskendale itself, however, would provide the most levies, among them 2/3 of the 2,000-strong city watch. In the 5 years since Aelor had been granted the city, he had worked tirelessly to train and equip the men under the city watch's banner, drilling them every day with his own household guards. In times like these that training would prove invaluable, as the peasants that would soon be flooding Duskendale would need both training and the occasional blow to the head if they stepped out of line. His retinue pulled their horses to a stop at the fork in the road just outside the gates. The traders scurrying around the 40-strong formation, many staring at the attractive dragonlord sitting astride the white palfrey, or the famed Barristan the Bold, fully armored and mounted on his own grey gelding. Slightly behind them a man bore the 3-headed red dragon on black field banner of House Targaryen, and beside him another bore 2 3-headed white dragons facing each other on a black field, the personal coat of arms of Prince Aelor Targaryen. Lord of Duskendale, Lord Renfred Ricker sidled his horse up beside his princes, clasping wrists with the second son of the king. "I'll return with my full force as soon as possible, your grace." Aelor nodded, clapping his lifelong friend on the shoulder. "This will not be a quick war, Ren. Shall I ask Lord Buckwell to bring Melissa with his host?" The Targaryen prince couldn't help but smile at the blush that overtook his massive friend's face at the mention of his betrothed. "You will have the full hospitality of both the Dun Fort and Duskendale itself for your wedding. You need only say the word." Renfred Ricker, who feared no man in either Westeros or Essos, turned white at the prospect of marriage. "I do not know if it will be necessary so soon. We both may die, old friend." Aelor spoke gently but firmly. "You are the first Lord Ricker. Your only brother is a member of the Night's Watch, if you die heirless. Hollard Hall reverts to me. I granted it to one friend for him to keep. I don't intend to grant it to another. There is no guarantee that the betting would result in a child, your grace." Aelor's smile grew. "No, but it certainly is worth a chance. You've postponed this marriage long enough, Ren. If we're to die for my family's follies, at least allow yourself some pleasure before we do." Renfred Ricker hesitated a long moment, indecision fighting a losing battle over his facial features before he finally nodded, eyes resigned. "Yes, your grace. I graciously accept your offer." Aelor laughed, clapping the larger Lord Ricker on the shoulder again as they released one another's wrists. "It's about damn time, strong shield. Stronger sword." Lord Ricker completed the greeting and farewell the two had used since they were toddlers in the Red Keep. With a salute he turned and spurred his palfrey down the road, 10 retainers in the blue and white of House Ricker peeling off to follow. Aelor spurred his palfrey towards the gate, Barristan and his own retainers following. "Are you certain it will come to war, your grace?" Barristan rode beside the man he had trained with a sword from birth, grateful to the king for assigning him to Aelor as his personal kingsguard. "I wouldn't call my banners if I wasn't, Barristan." The prince turned his eyes on his mentor. "If I were Eddard Stark, I'd do the same." He seemed like a shy lad at Harrenhal. Aelor nodded, turning his attention to the road as he passed under the portcullis. "He is quiet and honorable, the opposite of his brother, truth be told, but he has a strength to him. After the insults my family dealt to his, he has to respond." Aelor nodded and waved at the citizens they passed, many stopping to watch him pass by, smiling. His voice, however, held none of the mirth showing on his face. "You have more experience at war than I could hope to gain. What are your thoughts? And don't try to sweeten the sound of it for my father's sake, sir. I want your honest opinion." Barristan kept his gelding even with the princes, mulling the question even as he habitually watched the surrounding citizens for threats. An assassination attempt was unlikely, as Aelor was loved by Duskendale and its surrounding people, but Barristan was nothing if not thorough. The Northerners and Valemen will follow their liege lords to the death, as will most of the Stormlords. The Iron Islands won't budge. The Reach will likely stay loyalist, as will Dorne for Princess Alia's sake. Even after Rhaegar's dishonorable actions, Princess Aelia is still in King's Landing, your grace. Aelor darted his eyes to the Kingsguard knight. "You think my father?" The young lord let his voice drift off, looking down in thought before nodding slightly and returning his eyes to the road. "Aye, you're right, he would. I doubt I'll be able to convince him to send her and the children here or to Dragonstone either." Aelor shook his head. "Tywin Lannister may side against us as well after the years of insults my father hurled at him." Barristan shook his head. "No, your grace, Tywin Lannister may well take no part in the war, but he certainly won't side against us. The king keeps Jim close at hand." Aelor groaned. "Bloody hell, I'd forgotten, my father. Using his own bodyguard as a hostage. It will keep the might of Casterly Rock out of this war you're so certain of, your grace. As much as I hate it for Jaime, it does serve a purpose. The same purpose as dear Aelia and perhaps even my niece and nephew." Aelor rode on in silence for a moment. "How did we let things get this bad, Barristan?" It wasn't a question, and the Knight of the Kingsguard didn't answer, merely riding alongside his prince as he had for years. They were nearing the portcullis of the Dun Fort itself before the Dragonlord spoke again. "What of Hoster Tully? His eldest daughter was betrothed to Brandon Stark, your grace. Was being the key word, Catelyn. She's a fair lady and quick of mind if I recall. Do you suppose Hoster will ask for Eddard in place of her?" "I could not say, my prince." Aelor nodded, features drawn in thought. "If I offer myself as a husband to either Catelyn or, what's the other one's name? Younger girl? Lysa Tully, your grace." Yes, Lysa. If I ask to marry one of his daughters, I may be able to keep him loyal." Barristan felt a pang of concern for the boy he thought of as a son. "Your father would be furious were you to marry of your own choosing, your grace." Aelor snorted. It wouldn't be of my own choosing, Barristan, but my father will be furious with me no matter my course of action, and he hasn't chosen a bride for me on his own yet. At least I might be able to save my family before he burns me alive as well." Barristan smiled slightly, remembering the phrase the young prince had always used as a child when chided for attempting something far more dangerous than he should have. "Fire cannot kill a dragon, your grace." Aelor snorted out a laugh. "No, but steel most certainly can. It's the steel I'm wary of, Sir Barristan. Dragon or no, steel will kill you just the same." When Aelor Targaryen held a feast, he held a feast. It had taken a week and a half for the prince's bannermen to muster their levies and arrive in and around Duskendale. In that time he had somehow stocked the larder with vast quantities of boar and deer, acquired the services of both the bard Celador of White Harbor and a troupe of Tyroshi acrobats, and had forged a new blade for each of his bannermen and household knights. Even now, Sirs Gully, Elwood and Alester were engrossed in discussing their respective swords, though they had both drank enough by then that the conversation mostly consisted of repeating the same details over and over amidst rounds of boisterous laughter. The Northman bard played, and the Tyroshi enamored the crowd with flips and other acts of agility, each act earning more and more applause as the guests dove deeper and deeper into their cups. Aelor Targaryen, despite not having touched a drop of wine, was smiling wider than anyone else in the room. For the sake of the mother Renfred's smile, Lord Renfred Ricker, in direct contrast to his liege and friend, looked like he would rather be dueling the warrior himself than be there. "I don't know if I can do this, Aelor." The Targaryen laughed, violet eyes filled with mirth. "Well, it's too late to back out now, old friend. You have the wedded down, the bedded to go." Renfred turned red, contrasting with his dark blue doublet. "Exactly. Oh, come now, Renfred. Half the handmaidens in the Red Keep knew you were more than capable by the time you were 14, and from what Heavy Hallie told me, you haven't lost your touch." Renfred's blush doubled at the mention of the extremely well-endowed courtesan Aelor had had waiting in his friend's chambers the night before as a wedding gift of sorts. It was impressive in truth, for Ricker's face had already been as red as the Targaryen sigil. Aelor turned towards the table from the alcove he had found his friend hiding in, gesturing towards the pretty and plump girl seated there, laughing along with several other young ladies. "Look at Maelessa. She's having a grand time, and I dare say she has much more to fear from tonight than you do." The eldest daughter of Lord Buckwell had seemed completely calm and confident since the moment she arrived that morning. In truth, it nearly put her husband to shame. Ricker had been fidgeting restlessly for 3 days now. "I have no experience with maidens." Aelor grinned mischievously. "Well, it's like Willem Darry always told us, practice makes perfect." Before Ricker could stop him, Aelor had stridden out towards the middle of the chamber, calling out to the waiting lords and ladies. "Time for the bedding." Renfred's curses were swept away by the cry of the crowd as men converged on Maelessa and ladies on Ricker. Lady Byitch already working on his breeches as if she had been waiting all night for the chance. With a laugh, Aelor realized she probably had. Aelor made no move towards the throng of men surrounding Maelessa Buckwell, leaving the removal of clothes to those more inebriated, but he did nod at Sir Manfred Dark. The knight, bigger than Ricker and half as tall, muscled through the crowd and scooped the already mostly naked maiden into his arms, striding toward the chamber with the other partiers stumbling along behind. Aelor had instructed the man to make sure Maelessa made it to the bedding chamber unscathed, and while Sir Manfred was rude and perpetually angry, he was as loyal a man as Aelor had ever known. The new Lady Ricker would make it to the chamber unmarked if the short, wide knight had to break arms to make it happen. Aelor was laughing after the crowd of revelers when Sir Barristan stepped up beside him, materializing out of nowhere. "Your Grace, I have news." The prince nodded, chuckling once more before turning to his trusted mentor. "Good or bad? Expected, your grace." The Kingsguard gestured to another man dressed in heavy boots and a rumpled cloak. "A man from Gulltown in the Vale arrived on a galley just this night." Aelor nodded, the mirth draining from his face to be replaced by the clenched jaw and furrowed brow the prince adopted when he focused on matters of high importance. "Your name?" The man, half a boy in truth, was short and slightly built with wispy hair and a hairlip which quivered as he gulped nervously. "Ronald, my lord, I have information." Aelor nodded. "I look forward to hearing all about it." Aelor's solar was smaller than one might expect for a castle such as the Dun Fort, but it overlooked the city of Duskendale in all its splendor. Ronald was fidgeting nervously, apparently unsure if he was supposed to be looking at the view out the solar window, the plate of roasted boar in front of him, or the fair dragonlord seated across from him. Aelor ended his uncertainty quickly. "Eat." The man obliged, albeit nervously, eyes periodically darting up to either Aelor or Sir Barristan, who was standing behind the prince with his arms folded. "You claim to have information," the dragonlord began after a time. When Ronald nodded, Aelor leaned forward slightly. "Concerning what, exactly?" Ronald swallowed, his fidgeting increasing. "Lord Arryn, my lord." "Your grace," Barristan corrected from behind Aelor. "Why, your grace," the man corrected quickly. "I'm sorry, your grace." Aelor leaned forward. "Calm yourself, Ronald, I am not my father." The man, too much weight on his small frame to be a peasant but much too nervous to be familiar with dealing with nobility, relaxed ever so slightly, though his eyes were still wary and his knee did not slow its rapid up and down motion. "Where are you from?" "Gulltown, your grace." "And what do you do there?" "My father is the steward for Sir Arstan Saul, your grace. I assist him," Sir Barristan cut in, filling in the blanks for his prince. "A knightly house sworn to house Grafton, your grace. They control a tower house guarding one of Gulltown's gates." Aelor nodded. And you, Ronald, decided to board a galley and sail here to Duskendale with information for Prince Aelor Targaryen. Well, here you are and here I am. I'm listening. Ronald gulped again, eyes dancing between the other two men in the room. Aelor knew that whatever information the lad possessed, he had intended on being rewarded for it. Aelor didn't necessarily hold that against him. Nothing came free in this world, and information could be more valuable than all the gold in the Westerlands. While Ronald certainly would be rewarded if his information proved worth his time, Aelor didn't intend to promise anything. Spies and turncloaks had their uses, but their nature roiled his stomach. Aelor sharpened his gaze, letting the dark violet mingle with the shadows of the candlelight to darken his face intimidatingly. I don't have all night, lad, and while I'm not my father, I do not like to be kept waiting. Aelor let his jaw clench ever harder, blazing his gaze into the young man across from him. Whatever Ronald had been intending to ask for in return for this information must have suddenly become unimportant, because he opened up rather quickly. Lord Arryn has called his banners, your grace. There are rumors in Gulltown that he's opposing your father. Aelor nodded. It appears I was correct about our war. Gods, I hate being right sometimes. And Lord Grafton, he's going to answer the call to arms, your grace. He has already ordered Sir Saul and his sons to raise levies. What else? Ronald shrugged nervously. That is all I know, your grace. Any talk of lords remaining loyal to the crown? Rumors of mercenaries, news of that nature? No, your grace, I promise. I have told you all I know. Aelor leaned back, regarding the young man across from him coolly. Apparently you don't know too much, Ronald, although what you have told me is useful. Aelor looked towards the door of the Solar, ignoring the veilment for a moment. Sir Manfred, the broad-shouldered and ugly knight, opened the door at once, stepping through. Your grace, Aelor stood, and after a moment Ronald realized he should stand as well, nearly knocking his chair over in his rush to gain his feet. This man has proven his loyalty to the crown. 10 golden dragons and a mug of ale for him. Thank you, your grace. Ronald's face lit up as he answered, but Aelor was already moving past him, Sir Barristan at his heels. Aelor clapped Sir Manfred on the shoulder as he passed. He also arrived at my home intending to sell information he should have given me freely. He leaves Duskendale with a few less teeth than he arrived with. Aelor and Sir Barristan were out the door before the sound of Manfred's fist connecting with Ronald's face filled the room. That may have been a poor move, your grace. The man gave us valuable information. Aelor nodded, not slowing his stride. Yes, he did, and you're probably right. I suppose I have seen too many treacheries for money in King's Landing. It has turned me hostile to those who turn on their family for so little a motive as gold. You have never lacked for gold, your grace. Those who have see it much differently. Aelor couldn't argue that. A true statement. That's why I like you, Barristan. You put me in my place. I'll give him another dragon for the teeth. Aelor returned to the dining hall. Finding that after the bedding many of the guests had stumbled to their chambers, servants scurried about, cleaning the spills and reorganizing the disarray the visitors had left his hall in. A few were helping this knight or that lord to their feet and herding them off to their chambers. Aelor chuckled quietly. I see I wasn't missed. Sir Barristan, rest well. We rise early in the morning. There are peasants to train, hangovers to cure. Barristan the Bold nodded. Of course, your grace. Shall I convene a war council in the morning? Aelor nodded even as he turned to meander towards his chambers by the narrow sea. Of course, old friend. As Ronald so kindly confirmed, we are fighting a war after all. How Barristan had managed to assemble the bannermen and top knights so early in the morning Aelor would never know, yet when he entered the private dining hall they were almost all already in place, struggling through a breakfast of fresh fish from the docks. Struggling was the apt term, as most of them were moving sluggishly slow and Lord Byitch seemed to be more asleep than awake, but they were there in body if not in mind. Aelor waved them down as they tried to rise upon his entrance, taking his seat at the head of the table and returning the chorus of greetings from his bannermen. A servant brought him his own dish of steaming cod and a flagon of ale, and Aelor ate quickly and quietly as the men around him returned to nursing their hangovers, chuckling to himself when Lord Renford Ricker entered and was met with a round of good-natured ribbing. He sat beside Aelor, giving his longtime friend a shove in the shoulder when the Targaryen smirked at him. He looks happy. Good. The world needs more happiness. After several minutes he cleared his throat. My lords, we have received word from the Vale. Each of the lords and knights, no matter their stage of sickness from the night before, instantly gave him their full attention. Jon Arryn has called his banners. We are at war. Each of the men took the news calmly, nodding their heads. Lord Clayton Byitch, apparently more awake than he seemed, spoke first. He was a burly man though a shade short, a few years shy of 30 with a belly already beginning to grow portly. He kept his blonde hair short and his face clean-shaven, with brown eyes and a slightly large nose. Though loyal to Aelor, he could be ambitious and arrogant, as well as perpetually paranoid about losing what was his. That paranoia had driven both of his younger brothers, the handsome Bauman and Railthin Morgan, to leave Byitch Hall, and Aelor had taken them in as household knights in his personal retinue. It served both Lord Byitch and the Dragon of Duskendale well. Lord Clayton could rest easier without his irrational fear of treachery from his brothers, and Aelor got 2 very capable swords. What are your plans, your grace? That's what we are here to discuss, my friend. I have sent a raven to King's Landing informing my father of what has happened, though I expect Varys already knows. The king will call his own banners, of course, and the raven summoning me may well be on the way. I intend to already be marching by the time it arrives. The peasant levies have only just began training, your grace, cautioned Lord Donald Buckwell of Antlers. Melesa's father was in his 40s, of average height and build with a head of balding black hair peppered with gray and a drooping mustache. An honorable man, he had earned his knighthood in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, and while he was no strategist or master with a blade, he was solid and steady. Buckwell's new Goodson answered for Aelor. "We can train as we march." Renfred said with a nod to the other men. "We have the men to do so. Call a halt an hour or two before dusk and drill them until nightfall. By the time we reach an actual battlefield, they'll be as ready as they're ever going to get." "Levies are unreliable no matter their training," Lord Clayton countered. "The knights and retinues are the only force we can depend on." Sir Barristan spoke from his standing position behind Aelor. "That is true, Lord Byage. But with proper support, levy spears can turn a battle. While most of the peasants have never held a weapon before we armed them as you arrived, they can learn." Sir Manfred, his voice like stone breaking and his face scowling as it always was, spoke for the first time in Aelor's memory without cursing every other word. "They will fight as a wall. Alone the fuckers won't know which end of the spear to stick where and in whom, but together they'll do fine." "What are our numbers?" asked the quiet Lord Elwood Hart. Short and thin with a few stray copper hairs, he tried to pass for beard. 19, he had been a lord since he was 2 years old when a round of illness had taken his lord father and most of his household, leaving the young toddler Elwood as the sole survivor of House Hart. "We have over 6,000 men total," answered Sir Barristan. "The majority are trained men-at-arms or knights." "A relatively small army," Aelor admitted, "but we are already assembled. The Vale is only just beginning to muster, and Lord Arryn will have to smuggle Eddard Stark North and Robert Baratheon to the Stormlands to rally their own bannermen." "We can strike first," piped in Sir Bauman, notably standing as far from his older brother as he could. While they were relatively civil to one another, there was no love lost between the two eldest Byaches. "We should hit the Valemen or Stormlords before they can assemble." Aelor had been thinking along the same lines, as had most of the other knights and lords present, judging by the wave of nods that followed Sir Bauman's proposal. "They stand a better chance once they unite," agreed Ricker. "We hold the advantage of having the largest force already amassed and equipped." "The king will insist on your presence in King's Landing, your grace," cautioned Sir Barristan. While Sir Bauman's suggestion is credible. "Your father will expect you to reinforce the capital first," Aelor nodded. "And so I shall, though I will not remain there. We will march to King's Landing, training our levies as we go and swell our numbers once there. Then we march through the Stormlands. I intend to scatter as many Stormlord hosts as we can. If we take them piecemeal, we may be able to end this rebellion before it begins. The king may not approve, your grace. The king started this war with no small amount of help from my brother. I intend to end it. Whether he approves or not." Aelor rose to his feet, prompting the others to do the same. "Go to your men, my lords, war is upon us. We march for King's Landing by dusk." Elia Mardell knew Rhaegar Targaryen better than almost anyone, and even she hadn't seen it coming. When her husband had won the tourney at Harrenhal, unhorsing his own brother in the final tilt after both Targaryens had broken 12 lances on the other's shield, Elia and the entire realm had expected the heir to the Iron Throne to crown her the queen of love and beauty. It wasn't pride or a notion of her own beauty that made her believe so. It was simply expected of a victorious tournament winner to crown his wife. That was how it had always been and how it always would be. So when the Crown Prince of Dragonstone bypassed the royal box, bestowing the crown of winter roses on the head of the Stark girl, Elia had been duly surprised. While her union to Rhaegar had not grown into one of love, it had been a happy one. At least for Elia's part, she had thought Rhaegar to be happy as well, all the way until the day it was revealed that he had stolen Lyanna Stark. The Princess of Dorne had had no warning, no word from Rhaegar before or after hand to soften the blow. Truth be told, she still hadn't wrapped her mind around it fully. Her concern was more for her children than herself. Rhaenys was only 2 name days old and Aegon was still an infant. So the scandal of their father's betrayal of their mother wouldn't dawn on them for years yet. The war that had alongside their grandfather's lunacy had started, however, threatened them here and now. The Vale had called its banners, and it only stood to reason that the North and Stormlands were doing the same. King Aerys had called his own after a terrifying rant that had included the king burning the messenger alive with wildfire, but Elia wasn't sure how many lords would answer. Her good father's epithet of the Mad King was well-deserved. And Jon Arryn was well-respected across Westeros. She was quiet, but she certainly wasn't stupid. If this rebellion were to win, her children would be threats to whomever the traitors chose as king. And in the Game of Thrones, threats were removed. Violently. Elia called a rich baritone, and the Dornish princess's heart stopped when she turned to face it. For just a moment, Elia thought her husband had returned, striding towards her confidently. But no, this man was a few inches taller, and a fair bit broader through the shoulders and chest. A beard growing on a face that, while still attractive, didn't quite possess the haunting beauty that Rhaegar's did. Aelor, the princess greeted, genuinely pleased to see her good brother had returned. In Elia's private opinion, the Dragon of Duskendale was the only Targaryen with his head firmly on his shoulders. Her husband's recent lapse of judgment had only affirmed that belief. Though he was often away at Duskendale, ruling as a lord should, he still frequently visited King's Landing. He had a soft spot for his niece Rhaenys and was enamored with baby Aegon, at times seeming to care more for the children of his brother than his brother did himself. Aelor had also won Elia's undying friendship when he'd viciously berated his elder brother at Harrenhal, his rage having been so great that one would have thought he was the woman scorned. That fury had been terrible to behold. In those moments, with his violet eyes wide and muscled arms destroying everything within their reach, She had seen the only hint of madness Aelor had ever displayed. Elia was glad she hadn't been with him when he had learned of Rhaegar's most recent transgression. They stopped a few feet apart, Aelor bowing and Elia curtsying formally. The Lord of Duskendale's smile, however, was all warm familiarity, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it reassuringly. "And how is my favorite Dornishwoman?" Elia giggled girlishly, patting Aelor on the arm as he dropped his hand from her shoulder. "I'm the only Dornishwoman you know." Aelor's grin grew wider. "Nonsense, I'm rather well associated with your Vaith handmaiden if you recall, Talana with the long legs and impressively flexible everything." The princess scoffed a laugh, rolling her eyes even as her smile grew. "Of course, how could I forget? She went on about you for weeks, talking of how her dragon prince swept her off her feet." The dragon prince in question adopted a mischievous grin. "If I recall correctly, she swept me off of mine." They laughed for a good while, and Aelor realized how nice it was to do so again. Heavens knew there hadn't been much humor in her life of late. Even Aelor, who always managed to coax a smile from her, had been gone for some time. She had heard he had arrived in King's Landing the day the Starks had come demanding Lyanna's release and left that same night. She couldn't blame him. Everyone in the Red Keep knew of the king's obsession with fire and how it ignited his baser needs. The queen's screams were terrible to hear. "How are the children?" Aelor asked, cutting into her momentary reminiscence. The prince's eyes lit up at the thought of his niece and nephew. "Rhaenys is with Ashara, fussing over her kitten." "Ah yes, the infamous Balerion the Black Dread." Elia sighed in exasperation at the thought. "A title most appropriate, I assure you. Egon is with his wet nurse. I am on my way there now. I'll make sure to visit with them both while I'm here. I bought a new doll for Rhaenys all the way from Volantis. It has obsidian eyes as black as Balerion and corn silk hair." Elia couldn't help but think that Aelor was more excited at the prospect of giving the doll than Rhaenys would be at receiving it. And there were few things her daughter loved more than gifts. "You certainly spoil her." The reason for her earlier apprehension abruptly returned in full force, and her mirth dissipated rapidly. "Not that I am not pleased to see you, but why are you here? Your father just sent for you this past morning." Aelor's smile faded instantly. "It didn't take a genius to know how Jon Arryn would react to my father's demands. I have already called my banners. They are camped outside the city." Whatever hope Elia Mardell had held out that maybe, just maybe, war could be avoided, leaving her and her children in no more danger than the eccentric king provided on his own, died in that moment. "I see, so you march to war then." Aelor nodded, face grim. "I intend to scatter the Stormlord hosts before they can assemble. The North was risen against us as well, as I'm sure you know. The Dragonlord grimaced. The Riverlands will as well. I offered myself in a marriage proposal to either of Hoster Tully's daughters, and received his response mere hours before we marched. He claimed his eldest was in grieving for her recently strangled betrothed, and that he would not consider offers for his youngest until Catelyn had recovered and was married herself. It didn't take a superior mind to see through that. A farce of an answer. I imagine Tully has something else planned for his daughters. And I'd wager those plans have to do with the rebellious houses." Elia felt her worry grow. 4 of the 8 regions, half of the realm, all in rebellion because I couldn't please my husband. She didn't know whether to feel guilty or enraged. "How many men do you have?" 6,000 for now. I'll gather more. "Will the king allow you to go?" Aelor shrugged. "The king cannot stop me. I will not sit by while he and my brother destroy a dynasty that took fields of fire and rivers of blood to build." Elia nodded softly. "So you have had no word from Rhaegar either?" Aelor's eyes filled with a mixture of rage and pain. "None." Elia had nothing to say in response, and the Lord of Duskendale seemed to realize that. "I will say my goodbyes to you and the children before we march. I am on my way to handle my father now." Elia nodded. "Good luck. If you drive towards the Dornish marches, you will probably meet up with my brother's vanguard. Oberyn is likely to be in command. The two of you will make a force to be reckoned with." She pulled her good brother into a quick hug. "Take care, Aelor. The king grows worse every day." Aelor nodded, kissing her hand softly. "You do the same, Elia. I will make this right, I swear to you." As the Dornish princess watched the straight back of the dragon of Duskendale stride away, she couldn't help but wonder if by the end of this war there would even be anything left to make right. Each time Aelor saw his father, he looked worse than the time before. Aerys Targaryen once looked the part of king. His father had been tall, with a regal bearing. He'd had a love for dancing, for masked balls, for feasts. He had always been eccentric, even Aelor knew that, but the realm had prospered during the first dozen years of his reign. Tywin Lannister was to thank for that. It was true, as the Lord Paramount of the Westerlands was as capable a hand of the king as the realm had ever seen. But his father had at least managed to avoid plummeting the crown into despair. The defiance of Duskendale, however, the very rebellion that saw Aelor rewarded a keep and vassals, had driven whatever remnants of sanity Aerys Targaryen possessed into the darkest abyss of the Mad King's mind. His jealousy of Tywin boiled over, with Lannister resigning his post as Hand of the King, leaving Aerys to rule unchecked. It was then that it had all gone to utter shit. "Father," Aelor greeted with a cheeriness he most certainly did not feel. Aerys' hair was long and matted, his fingernails even longer, curving like talons. His once proud bearing had been replaced by a stooped posture, the crown upon his father's head seemingly driving the incompetent king below it into the ground. Aelor could even see a few fresh wounds the Iron Throne had inflicted upon Aerys and the dozens of scabs from previous ones. "Aelor," his father croaked out, his voice cracking as if the man mistrusted language itself. Aelor supposed that might actually be the case. King Aerys certainly mistrusted everything else. "You have an army outside my gates. The dragon of Duskendale sank to a knee below the Iron Throne. "An army here to serve you, your grace." Aelor rose after a few moments, knowing that if he waited for his father to bid him rise that he would be on that knee for hours. Aerys didn't seem to notice, still transfixed on his first statement. "You have an army outside my gates. I only summoned you yesterday morning. How are you here?" Aelor met his father's eyes, no mean feat considering Aerys' eyes were barely recognizable as human anymore. They reminded Aelor more of a cornered predator than a king. "I took the liberty of calling my banners days ago, your grace." Aerys' eyes filled with rage and he leaned forward in his throne of twisted iron. "I did not command that. You are my son, you follow my commands." "No, you didn't command that. You only abused your prized dogs and expected them to never bite." "Yes, father, as always. I merely intended to have my men ready to serve you quicker so you need not wait for them to arrive." This seemed to appease the king somewhat, for Aerys leaned back on his throne. Aelor wished to bring this meeting to a close as quickly as possible, and with that goal in mind he wasted no time with preamble. "I hear we are at war. With your leave, I beg permission to gather the men of Lord Bywater and march on the Stormlands with them combined to my own strength." Aerys nearly snarled. "He serves me." "Yes, your grace, as do I. I only wish to bring these traitors to heel, for the glory of King Aerys and House Targaryen. I have already sent out missives labeling Lords Arryn, Stark, and Baratheon traitors," rambled the old voice belonging to the even older Lord Owen Mayweather. Aelor had never cared for the man. He was amiable enough, it was true, but the replacement of Tywin Lannister as Hand of the King was about as useful as nipples on a breastplate. "Yes, my lord, and done nothing else," Aelor snapped, causing the elderly Hand to furrow his brow in insult. "Good, be insulted. The seven know you can't do anything else." Aelor turned his attention back to his father. "Father, I beg you allow me to end this war. Let them sing of the praises of King Aerys, of how he ended a war before it could truly begin." Aerys stared at his second son for a long time, Aelor meeting it. When he finally spoke, he thrust a gnarled, scarred finger towards Aelor, his talon of a nail angling down. The king's tone was suspicious, untrusting. "Mad, you wish to make the people love you more than they do me. I could be an ugly imbecilic dwarf and still manage that without much difficulty, father. I do not, your grace, you are the king. I only intend to help you solidify and protect your kingdom." This round of staring was longer than the first, and Aelor felt his patience wearing thin. He held his tongue, however. He would do his family, broken as it was, no good dead, and Aelor knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that his father's mind had regressed to the point that he would willfully kill his own son. When King Aerys spoke again, he rose, bringing the other courtiers to their feet as well. Aelor had paid them no mind. Lickspittles each and every one, focused only on increasing their positions by flattering their king with praises they didn't mean. Aelor cared for none of them. "Go." The single word was both permission and dismissal, and Aelor wasted no time in exiting. "Thank you, your grace." Sir Manfred Dark, Lord Hart, and Lord Ricker awaited him outside the main hall, Aelor having left Sir Barristan in charge of his forces outside the city. The Dragon Prince had feared that, upon seeing the white of his armor, the king would demand Sir Barristan remain in King's Landing. Aelor refused to risk that possibility. He was a deadly warrior, a truth he prided himself on and strove to maintain, but Sir Barristan had experience of war Aelor knew he would need in the coming conflict. "Send a rider to Lord Bywater. His force will be ready to march by the time I reach the Kingswood. From there we march on Bronze Gate." Lord Hart hastened to obey, always diligent and timely when given orders, striding away quickly towards the courtyard where he had left his palfrey. "I take it the king has approved of your plan then, my lord," Ricker mused. "That didn't take long. Is it unholy for man to dread the company of his own father? If so, the seven must surely despise me." I ascertained permission as quickly as I could and left. Time is after all of the essence. When do we leave? "By nightfall, see to the preparations, Ren. Strong shield. Stronger sword," Lord Ricker replied before he strode confidently in the same direction Lord Hart had just gone. "Manfred," Aelor spoke to the boulder beside him, "with me." The big man dutifully fell into step behind his liege lord, following as the Targaryen prince strode deeper into the Red Keep. The biggest obstacle has been removed, at least for the time being, thought Aelor Targaryen, as he hastened through the castle where he had been born and raised. "Now I just have a war to win." Rhaenys looked more and more like her mother. The toddler was still forming words, and she babbled unintelligibly but happily to the doll he had brought for her. Aelor couldn't help but smile down at her from the doorway, knowing that the tiny princess would grow into a beauty that rivaled even Ashara Dane, who was holding another of the dolls Aelor had made gifts to the girl, playing along. The tiny princess had her uncle wrapped around her tiny olive-toned fingers, and the entire Red Keep knew it. Aelor didn't care, he would fight and die for that child. Thanks to both her father and his, he very well might. "You can go in, you know." Aelia appeared beside him, tiny Aegon resting soundly in her arms. The Dornish princess had always been quiet, even in movement, and Aelor started slightly at her sudden appearance. The Targaryen prince grinned at the sleeping baby that reminded him so much of his brother. "I know, but I can't stay long. We march for the Stormlands tonight. I had Ashara give her the doll. She certainly seems to like it." Aelia Mardell laughed. "Of course she did. She always does love presents." Aelia offered the infant snoozing in her arms to Aelor, but he shook his head reluctantly. "I had best not. My men are already being roused and are preparing to march. I must join them. I was only waiting for you." Aelia furrowed her brow in confusion. "Sir Manfred," Aelor called quietly. The big man stepped around the corner, face impassive even as he bowed to the beautiful woman before him. Aelia raised an eyebrow, looking to Aelor for explanation. "Princess Aelia, this is Sir Manfred Dark. He is uncouth and savagely mean, but he is as loyal a man as I have ever met and a good friend to me. Aelor looked the Dornish woman full in the face, his dark violet eyes peering into her nearly black ones. I am leaving him here with you as your sworn shield. I will miss him on the battlefield, but his business here is much more important. Though I pray to the mother, he never needs to go about it. The numbers against us are great, and my father's madness grows worse. If King's Landing is to fall, you and the children will be in the gravest danger of all, if not from the rebels then from the king himself. Elia didn't like this talk of her greatest fear being realized, especially coming from the man with whom her best hope of preventing it lay. King's Landing is well defended, her gates breachable. Aelor cut in gently. If that is to happen, Sir Manfred has been tasked with getting you and the children as well as my mother and viceroys out of the city. He has never failed me before, and I know he will not in this. If the time comes, you must do exactly as he says, if not for yourself then for Rhaenys and Aegon. The dragon of Duskendale held the delicate spear's eyes for a long moment, face set in grim seriousness. Do you understand, good sister? Elia could only nod. Fear for her children and for the young Targaryen in front of her making it nearly impossible to speak. Aelor dropped his gaze to the baby in her arms, his grim face breaking into a sad smile for just an instant before he abruptly turned and strode away, offering no parting words nor waiting to receive any. Elia could only watch him go for the second time that day, wondering if it might be the last time she ever saw him. Sir Manfred Dark spoke as Aelor rounded a corner and disappeared, the knight's voice nearly as ugly as his face. I am here to serve, princess. Elia nodded absently. Let us pray you never have to, Sir Manfred. The Dornish princess turned and entered the room where her daughter played oblivious in the way only children could be to the dangers she was now in. Let us pray hard. The knight with a white slash on his blue shield struck high, bringing his morning star down hard at the Targaryen's helm. A shield of oak and banded steel deflected it aside, its wielder using the moment to slash his sword at the Stormlander. The blue shield met it, the morning star snapping on its chain and, whistling for the sword-bearer's head, Aelor Targaryen ducked low, the spiked ball barely clearing the top of his helm. The Stormlander, a warrior from House Hasty, reversed the chained weapon again, swinging it as hard as he could back towards his opponent. The Dragon Prince spun just outside of its reach, the deadly hunk of steel just missing his back, and stepped in all in one move. Before the nameless knight could bring his shield to defend, Aelor Targaryen's blade drove through the chainmail between his helm and breastplate, piercing skin, artery, and throat. Blood spurted running down the chainmail and breastplate, leaving a red river through the water blue of his surcoat. Before Morning Star had even hit the ground, another knight took his place, this one in the dented armor and hacked-up shield of a hedge knight. It's the dragons on my shield. Tracks opponents like a Lyseni whore. This knight carried the characteristic sword and shield, as did Aelor. He came on quickly, trying to catch the Dragon Prince while he was still recovering from killing the Morning Star Knight, but Aelor matched him blow for blow. It took half the time to cut this man down, Aelor slashing his legs out from under him before driving his castle-forged steel into the downed knight's chest. 3 more came. 2 more hedge knights and 1 mere man at arms, and all 3 soon hit the ground. On and on it went, for how long Aelor couldn't say and didn't care about. Aelor felt alive in battle, his sword a whirlwind of steely death, his shield both a defense and an offense. His mind never worked faster, his blade never swung quicker, and his body never felt stronger than it did when he was on the battlefield. It was odd in a sense. He himself never felt more life than when he was taking someone else's. The Dragon Prince smashed his shield into the face of a helmless man even as he disarmed, in every sense of the word, a toweringly tall opponent with the 9 silver unicorns of House Rogers on his chest. He cut the man's scream short with a downward thrust, piercing the very same heart that was pumping blood out of the gaping wound where his arm used to be. The Dragon of Duskendale stood, extracting his blade from the now very dead man's chest, and whirled to meet the blade darting in on him. At least that had been his intent. There was a sudden lack of blades. As Aelor came out of his battle haze, he found that not only was there a lack of swords trying to kill him anywhere near, there also seemed to be a lack of bodies, live ones anyway. There were certainly plenty of corpses. Your Grace, called a familiar voice, and the Dragon Prince turned to see a knight in white enamel armor working his way through the dead towards him. Sir Barristan Selmy's white cloak was covered in blood, but none of it seemed to be his. He moved through the battlefield, which was much changed from the last time Aelor had had time to notice it. The clang of steel and screams of men and horse had seemed to die down, replaced by an eerie silence that was interrupted periodically by the cry of a dying man, or 2, maybe 10. Aelor couldn't really tell, it was hard to differentiate over the sound of his own heavy breathing. 7 hells, I always forget about this part. The black sword in his hand seemed to have grown exponentially heavier in the past few moments, and his black shield with the warring white dragons was nearly dragging his left arm to the ground. Everything seemed to hurt, even speaking. Sir Barristan, they've broken your grace. Lord Ricker's cavalry took their rear, so the diversion worked, and here I thought it was our spirited charge. Good to hear. Aelor registered the remnants of his vanguard. Once 400 mounted knights strong, around the field beside and behind him. Most were unmounted, losing their mounts as Aelor had to the spears of the Stormlander lines. Lord Ricker's flanking force, another 700 knights, sat their mounts to the field in front like a wall of horseflesh, certainly in much better condition than his own men. That was the intent, I suppose, hammer and anvil and all that. Funny, the song never mentioned how unpleasant it is for the anvil. Kingsguard Knight removed his helm, and it dawned on Aelor that he was burning alive in his armor, prompting him to do the same. He drove the point of his blade into the ground, holding the helm with the white flame crest in his sword hand. I'll have to sharpen that later. Wait, I have a squire for that now. A stab of concern shot through him then, as he couldn't recall seeing the boy since his destrier went down. Where's Alaric? Here, my lord, spoke a voice behind him. And Aelor nearly jumped out of his armor, turning to find the 14-year-old a few feet away, sword bloodied. His helm was off, the lad's face as green as the banner of House Byage. Tall and thin, Alaric of House Langward was 14 and had been Aelor's squire for all of 3 days. The Dragon Lord and his army had merged with Lord Danto's Bywater of the Kingswood and his vassals at Langward Hall, a mere few miles away from where they stood now. Lord Jarman Langward, 70 years old and as crotchety as anyone Aelor had ever met, had instantly offered his great-grandson as squire upon learning that Aelor no longer had one. He'd knighted Jeremy Ricker, Renfred's brother and now a ranger of the Night's Watch after the cursed tourney at Harrenhal. Aelor had accepted mainly to get the cranky elder to shut his mouth. Sir Barristan's brown hair was plastered to his sweat-coated forehead, but he was grinning. Your squire did well, your grace kept up with you throughout the charge. I tried to get behind the knight with the Morning Star, your grace, the lad said, face still marvelously sick though his quiet voice was firm. A spear got in my way and then another. Aelor had taken a shine to the shy lad in the few days he'd known him and felt marvelously guilty for having forgotten about him during the heat of the battle. Are you hurt, Alaric? No, your grace, the boy said, his shaggy black hair sweat-soaked. Just my gut. It was only a few moments more before the lad was depositing the contents of his stomach over the nearest dead corpse, then trying to aim elsewhere and instead covering his armored boots. Aelor smirked sympathetically. I had the same reaction my first battle. Barristan grinned as well. I remember. The sound of thundering hooves cut him off and Lord Renfred Ricker rode up alongside several knights, the visor of his spiked helm up and his warhammer bloody. Ren, Aelor called cheerily. I see you still have your horse, lucky I seem to have misplaced mine, strong shield. Renfred Ricker grinned. Stronger sword, this sense of misplacement must be spreading, your squire seems to be losing his morning meal. Don't be hard on him, old friend, we did the same. Ricker laughed. That we did, I have a present for you. He waved a hand and 2 knights Aelor didn't recognize rode forward. Another armored man on a horse between them. This one, a prisoner judging from his lack of weapon and the fact that his wrists were tied to his horse, had 3 golden buckles on his surcoat and a bloody gash in the joint of his elbow armor. His helmet was gone, showing long red hair and green eyes peering out of a bruised face near 30. Meet Lord Ralph Buckler, Lord of the Windwater. Aelor regarded the man coolly, ignoring addressing him for the moment. Do you have any others? Lord Bryce Rogers, one of Buckler's vassals, and several other knights, were sorting them now. Losses, I lost no more than 40 or 50, they broke before my good father even had a chance to move in with our full force. I don't know about your vanguard though, your grace. Aelor nodded grimly, neither do I. Ralph Buckler had a deep voice, shockingly so for a man of shorter than average height and a slight build. I was only following my liege orders, my prince. Aelor snorted. I'm apparently no longer your prince, Lord Buckler. That honor seems to belong to Robert Baratheon or perhaps Eddard Stark. Tell me, have you worked that particular detail out among yourselves yet? Buckler's face colored, though from the fear in his face he was quite aware of how short his life expectancy might have just become. Your father burned Lord Stark alive. Aelor nodded. Yes, he did, I was there. I'm not saying my father was correct in that action, but I find rebellion to be rather drastic, don't you? Buckler nearly snarled, losing a touch of his fear in his anger. And burning a man while his son strangled himself trying to free him is not. Ricker barked from astride his stallion. Watch your tone. Aelor waved his friend off, setting his jaw and narrowing his gaze. Whatever your justification, you rose in rebellion to the Targaryen dynasty, and now a Targaryen holds you prisoner. I wonder, what am I to do with you? As I said, I was following your liege orders, yes. Aelor grin was all charm, though his gaze was anything but. Why don't you tell me all about them? The messenger wore a black and green surcoat with a white crescent moon on his right breast. At least that was supposed to be the color scheme. Thanks to the roughly bandaged wound from an axe having come down on his right shoulder, digging deep and rendering that arm useless, everything just looked red. Bronzegate had surrendered without incident. After surrounding the large but plain castle with the great bronze gates that gave it its name, Aelor had displayed both Lord Buckler and the tall, portly Lord Bryce Rogers before the walls. Lady Buckler just so happened to be Lord Rogers' sister, and fear for her husband and brother as well as the 10,000-strong Targaryen loyalists surrounding her keep had made the plump woman as plain as her castle see sense. She'd opened the gates of bronze. And Aelor Targaryen rode, though without trouble. The battle fought that morning just a mile north had been short and bloody, but also relatively insignificant. Lord Buckler had had only 2,000 men, a good number of them untrained levies. Their lines had been broken by less than 1,000 mounted knights, many of the inexperienced peasants throwing their spears down and fleeing before the wedge of lances, led at the point by a demon in black armor with white flames cresting his helm, had even barreled into them. The rest had broken when Lord Ricker, having slipped by their right flank and gotten behind their lines by keeping to the hills, crashed into their rear. The loyalist infantry under Lords Buckwell and Bywater hadn't even had time to arrive on the field. Only the center, manned by Buckler's retainers and the top knights sworn to him and his vassals, had put up much resistance. That's where Aelor had been. Nearly 200 knights, half of his vanguard, had died fighting alongside him, but they'd broken the Stormlander lines. Lord Buckler's hall was square, and as plain as seemingly the rest of Bronzegate, but it housed well over 100, and it was there that Aelor and his advisors had taken their meal. Lord Buckler, arm bandaged and face black and purple from bruising, had been confined a prisoner in his own chambers with his wife Aelor and their 2 small children, 6-year-old Andras and 3-year-old Rohan. They were under guard in their own castle, a humiliating thing to be sure. But they were as comfortable as prisoners of war had any hope of being. Lord Rogers, on the other hand, had viciously cursed Aelor after it had been found that the tall knight with the silver unicorn surcoat the Dragon Prince had slain had been his 16-year-old son and heir, and was now rotting in his good brother's cells. Lord Barristan Hasty of Hadlow Keep had been in command of Buckler's center. He, along with his brother and 2 cousins, had died there. The messenger was nearly carried in, half dead already but set on delivering his news. "Your Grace," the man croaked, in his early 20s with a thrice-broken nose but otherwise fair-featured face. Aelor was on his feet at once, the humble meal of venison and potatoes forgotten as he near sprinted towards the wounded knight in house fell colors. "Sit him down," the Dragonlord nearly roared, and a chair was quickly shoved behind the man's knees, the 2 sentries supporting him, seating him as gently as they could. I have news, my lord." The knight's brown eyes were racked in pain, but he pushed forward stubbornly before Aelor could answer. "Lord Baratheon is at Summerhall. Defeated Lord Fell, Lord Grandison and Lord Catherine one by one. 2 days ago, Lord Fell is dead." Aelor knelt beside the badly. "Your name?" "Sir Roland Rawlins, your grace." Sir Rawlins had to speak around his gasps for breath, eyelids drooping lower and lower. "Lord Baratheon knows you're coming, my prince. Only has 4,000 men with him. He's going to rally the rest where he is." Sir Rawlins fell into unconsciousness then, and Aelor stood to his full height. The Maester now move. His men rushed to obey, 4 of them picking Sir Roland up and nearly sprinting towards the Maester's chamber, while others rushed to round the man himself. An old Northman named Targaryen, from where he was tending the wounded from the battle that morning. Aelor turned back towards the high table where his advisors were all staring at him, half of them still half out of their seats from being startled when Sir Roland had burst in. "Sir Barristan," Aelor commanded, eyes focused. "I want the best scouts. We have to ride for Summerhall and find and track Baratheon's army. I want to know his numbers and how many of his lords haven't merged with him yet." "At once, your grace," the Kingsguard knight replied, but Aelor wasn't finished. "Send a messenger both down the Boneway to treat with the Dornish and another towards the Reach. The Tyrells will still be rallying, but he's to gather the first sizable force he can and order them to close down the Kingsroad south of King's Landing. We cannot allow Baratheon to unify with Lords Arryn or Stark. We keep him in the Stormlands and we finish him here. The Dornish are to march with haste up the Boneway and close him off from Dorne." Sir Barristan nodded and turned, striding out of the hall while already giving orders. Lord Rickard was standing, the plate of cooling stag in front of him forgotten. It seems Lord Buckler was telling the truth about his wayward vassal. The Fells were sworn to the Bucklers along with the Rogers and Hasties, but Aelor had realized shortly after the battle that only the latter 2 had been present. He now knew why. Lord Buckwell grunted. He failed to mention Summerhall, however. "He was told to hold us here." Baratheon probably knew it was an impossible task and didn't communicate further. Lord Dantos Bywater of the Kingswood, gaunt of face with copper hair he kept cut close, scrunched his face up in shock. He sacrificed his men. Aelor retook his seat, staring at his plate in thought. He had 2. I had 10,000 men descending on his head, and his bannermen had only just begun to rally. He had to buy himself time, especially when Fell and his allies remained loyal to the crown. Aelor looked up and waved his hand around the hall. "It worked. The longer I'm here, the longer he has to amass troops." Lord Byitch raised an eyebrow. "How did he get to Summerhall so quickly?" "According to Rawlins, he only has 4,000 men. That's his retinue and whatever men he could raise on the fly. He knew he had to put down the loyalists quickly, and he did." Rickard furrowed his brow in confusion, though he too sat back down and resumed eating. "So why is he suddenly intending to rally his forces at Summerhall, so close to the Tyrells? Why not return to his seat of power?" "Because if Sir Rawlins hadn't told us of my ancestors' ruin of a castle, where would we be going, Wren?" Understanding spread across Lord Rickard's face. "Storm's End." Aelor nodded. "We attacked this force for the same reason he left it. I can't have a substantial enemy presence to the rear. Were we to converge on Storm's End, laying siege to a castle that has been deemed impregnable, Baratheon would finish rallying his men, and then he'd be in perfect position to utterly fuck us." Lord Hart was seated beside Renfred, who in turn was directly beside Aelor, but the Dragon of Duskendale still had trouble hearing him when he spoke. "Or to ignore us completely, and march to unify with Lords Stark and Arryn." Bywater, who in Aelor's limited experience with him had struck the prince as eager but an incompetent tactician, spoke next. "And the Tyrells?" Aelor shook his head. "Mace Tyrell has a lot of men, but he's a fool. A fool with 40,000 soldiers is less useful than a genius with 50. "They have Randall Tarley," Rickard pointed out. "True, and I can only hope Tyrell has given him full command, though I somehow doubt it." Lord Buckwell had always been down to business, and war hadn't changed that. "What is our next move, your grace?" "Sieging Storm's End is out of the question. They'll only have a skeleton force since Baratheon already marched to Summerhall, but even that would likely be enough to hold us for an extended period of time. Summerhall was a pleasure castle and it wasn't very defensible even before it burned down. Baratheon is not fortified. But he's also not expecting me to head straight for him. And we are? No, we're not. Aelor stood amidst the confused ramblings of his advisors. The Evenstar doesn't have near enough ships to sail his strength into Shipbreaker Bay. They can only ferry from the island of Tarth the short distance over the Straits of Tarth to Drakesgrave, where Lord Selwyn will probably rally his mainland vassals. They'll march on land from there to Summerhall. Rickard stood as well, knowing where this was headed. We can potentially catch them as they disembark. Tarth has another 3,000 or 4,000 men. Aelor nodded. The goal of our entire campaign was to scatter the Stormlord host before they can march. Even if Baratheon is at Summerhall, I see no need to alter that course of action. As long as the Tyrells and Dornish do as they're ordered and keep him bottled up in his own lands, we can cut him apart piece by piece. Lord Buckwell gave a small grin beneath his massive mustache. We're going to remove the stag's antlers. Aelor drained his flagon of ale before turning to leave. Damn right, prepare the men. We force march tonight. Lord Selwyn Tarth the Evenstar was rumored to be highly competent, a good man who accomplished what was ordered of him quickly and efficiently. That's why it came as a disappointment to Aelor when he crested the ridge and saw galleys still disembarking men in the quartered yellow sun on red and white moon on blue of House Tarth. He supposed he could understand, though. It should have only taken him half the time it had to march the relatively short distance from Bronzegate to Drakesgrave. But the storms that gave the Stormlands their name had begun a torrential downpour that hadn't lightened until 2 days earlier. 10,000 men took a considerable amount of time to move in perfect circumstances, and with the storms turning the roads into mud, his supply wagons kept getting caught in the slop, slowing his army's movements to the point that Aelor Targaryen had been ready to rip his silver hair out by the roots. The only plus was that it had slowed the army of Selwyn down as well. The Straits of Tarth were shielded from the worst of storms by the mountains of the island of the same name, but only a fool would try to transport hundreds of armored men across the waters in one. Selwyn Tarth was clearly no fool, judging by the defensive lines his landward vassals had set up to defend the disembarking troops, even though they surely had been praying they wouldn't need them. They had to know they were outnumbered by more than 2 to 1, and the positioning of Drakesgrave gave them nowhere to flee to. They had to be betting Aelor would march on the supposedly undefended Storm's End, leaving them to slip around and merge at Summerhall. Even so, Evenstar had been ready. Before Aelor was a sea of banners bearing the crossed white quills on a brown field of House Penrose of the Parchments, the yellow haystack on an orange field of House Errol of Haystack Hall, and the quartered yellow pavilion on blue field and green laurel branches on white field of House Musgood of Drakesgrave, whose small castle and town stood a few hundred yards behind the Stormlander lines, nearly on the water of the straits where Tarth men were rushing out of galleys. 2 half-dug trenches lined the field to their front, and the Stormlanders were dashing to form a shield wall behind them. Aelor Targaryen whirled on his black stallion, the second of 4 destriers he kept in times of war. The first had died outside Bronzegate, and Aelor knew there was a high likelihood that this one wouldn't survive this battle. It was an inevitable part of knighthood. Horses died under you by the score. You could only hope you didn't soon follow them into death. Form a wedge, he called, and voices and a warhorn carried the command down the entirety of his line. It was the same formation he had used at Bronzegate. I suppose I'm an unoriginal military mind, but things become the norm by working. This isn't a time to get too creative for my own good. He had pulled nearly all of his cavalry, 1,500 knights, into his front lines, leaving 200 as a reserve. Ren, take the left. Strong shield. Renfrid Ricker slammed a gauntleted fist into his breastplate. Stronger sword. The big man closed his spiked visor before spurring his own stallion towards his awarded flank. Sir Barristan, you have the right. The Kingsguard nodded and rode to his own assignment. Watch for arrows from the castle walls. The Dragon Prince yelled after his closest friends. Lords Buckwell and Bywater, you have the infantry. We'll smash into them and you will fill the cracks in their lines. File them all into the same hole if you have to. We take those galleys, understood. Both men nodded and turned their horses. Lord Byitch, you have the reserve. Whenever you see an opportunity, take it. They have nowhere to go except those galleys in the castle, and I don't want them to reach either. Lord Clayton pulled the visor of his own helmet down. They won't, your grace. He spurred his mount away. Alaric, my helmet. Aelor's tall, lanky squire instantly handed the knight his white flame-crested helm, and the Dragonlord pulled it over his silvery hair. Alaric dutifully then handed him his shield and lance before mounting his own gelding. Stay close to me, Alaric. I'll watch your back and you watch mine. Are you with me? Alaric Langward pulled his own helm, a plain hunk of grey steel Aelor had gifted him before Bronzegate when the boy had made it clear he wouldn't remain behind, over his head. He's a good lad. I'll have to get him a better suit of armor. To the death, your grace. Aelor felt a sense of pride for the young man he barely knew. Let's hope that's not the case. He turned to his men then, rows of steel and horseflesh waiting for his word and his word only. As it turned out, Aelor didn't have many words. The idea seemed pretty obvious to him. I'm not good at pretty speeches, so I won't give one. Let's just kill the bastards. He thrust his lance into the air, and his knights did the same, roaring back at him. Even the men who couldn't hear him repeating the gesture. Targaryen, the dragon of Duskendale, Prince Aelor, all those filled his ears, as well as others of individual houses or the Iron Throne in general. There wasn't, unsurprisingly, any roars for King Aerys. Aelor kicked his stallion into action and they were off, the thunder of hooves even louder than the thunder of the storms that had rocked the land mere days ago. Aelor formed the point of the wedge, his black and white lance matching his night black armor with his warring white dragons etched into the breastplate, the white flames of his helmet shining in the sun. He was sure it made a glorious sight. It also makes me a target. Making an impression certainly has its disadvantages. Alaric rode to his right, a high place of honor for squire, but he had remained alive and near Aelor at Bronzegate when many more experienced knights had died. In Aelor's mind, the squire had earned it. Sir Bauman Bayich in his resplendent green armor rode to his left, his battle-axe-wielding brother Morgan beside him. It took forever and no time at all to reach the first trench, which Aelor's mount vaulted cleanly, doing the same to the second. The Dragon Lord knew many of his men would be held up by the trenches, and some horses undoubtedly would trip in the shallow earthworks, breaking legs and being trampled by the men charging in behind. It was losses he'd have to take. The shock of hundreds of armored knights smashing into the Stormlander lines would spook levies, as even now he could see some lose their nerve and turn to flee. More did so when he lowered his lance, his knights doing the same, hundreds of sharpened steel points hurtling towards the wavering men of Tarth. They crashed into the lines like an armored fist into a stomach. Aelor impaled a man at arms on his lance, the momentum of his horse driving the shaft halfway through his gut. Aelor dropped it in its cargo, unsheathing his sword and setting to the grisly work he so enjoyed. His stallion had somehow managed to avoid the forest of spears on the Stormlander front lines, already having survived longer than his first did. Many of his men's horses weren't so lucky, the blood-curdling scream of dozens of dying coursers filling the air. His own beast didn't stop, driving through the thick conglomeration of enemy combatants, his rider's sword rising and falling, dealing death with alarming speed. Before the Dragon of Duskendale truly understood what was happening, he had burst out the back of the first formation of Stormlanders, and into the second, beheading the first man he came across and opening another's throat only a second later. His stallion again avoided the spears. Aelor couldn't help but say a prayer in the back of his mind that the beast made it through, as it never stopped its momentum until he was through that line as well. Aelor wheeled around, finding that Sir Bauman was no longer on his left, having been replaced by a knight in the blue and white of either Renfred or Lord Bywater. He couldn't tell at the moment, and it wasn't important, but that Alaric had against all odds stayed with him, wheeling his own gelding around with Aelor. Even as he crashed into the already breaking men-at-arms, killing with each strike, Aelor's mind was spinning. Something isn't right. There are no knights solidifying these levies, no commanders holding firm. His confusion was clarified in the next moment. "My prince," the unnamed knight beside him yelled, pointing with a mace dripping of gore and brain matter. "The infantry." Aelor peered over the heads of the pigs for slaughter below him. Seeing his foot soldiers pouring towards the melee he was currently involved in, and hundreds of Stormlander knights formed in a wedge of their own and flying the stag of Baratheon and quartered banner of House Tarth smashing into their side. "Damn it," Aelor growled, cursing himself for a fool. "It seems you're not the only one who knows how to flank. To the infantry go." He spurred his own mount forward, paying no more mind to the poor men below him other than to cut down those in his way. The flank, he bellowed as he rode, directing more and more of his knights to the actual threat. The galas behind him were forgotten, for the Stormlander knights, despite their small numbers, had wreaked havoc on his infantry, Aelor's levies, just as inexperienced as the Stormlanders, having done the same as Lord Tarth's, turning and fleeing. It took him much longer to navigate his way through the two Stormlander lines the second time than it had the first. The field full of bodies of dead men and horses, some of the still living ones still trying to kill him. He galloped towards the new hotspot of the battle, seeing the field in front of him as if he was just an observer. Lord Clayton's reserves of knights were already charging at the threat, his men-at-arms and braver levies turning to swarm at the mounted rebels. The unnamed knight in white and blue was gone, Aelor having noticed in his peripheral the man's horse go down. But Alaric Langward was still beside him as always. There were other knights from the front lines both ahead and behind him, the men who had been at the rear already well on their way to counter the flanking action. It was a suicide mission for the Stormlanders, but Aelor knew they had known it beforehand. When he finally reached the flanking enemy, he let his rage go, hacking a man in the yellow and orange of House Errol off of his horse with more force than Aelor even knew he possessed. The prince pulled his reins, his miraculously still living stallion begrudgingly coming to a halt, and the Dragon of Duskendale let out a roar worthy of the title as he chopped men left and right as more and more of his own soldiers converged on the threat. A lance nearly took him in the helm, but he dodged to the side at the last moment, instinctually wrapping his arms around it and yanking. The knight it belonged to, unprepared for that, was pulled from his horse, where Aelor's footmen swarmed him like buzzards on carrion. It served to snap Aelor out of his haze, and he realized the suicide knights had been washed away in an ocean of red and black Targaryen colors. He turned his stallion towards the ocean and felt his heart drop when he saw that the galleys had pulled anchor and were even now pulling back into the sea. The Stormlanders had left hundreds dead on the field. But Aelor knew in his heart that Lord Tarth and his most vital vassals and knights were still aboard those ships pulling farther and farther away. "Damn it," the Dragon Prince roared. "Damn it all." They found Morgan Bayich in the arms of his brother. The youngest of the three Bayich brothers had been one of the first knights to counter Selwyn Tarth's flanking maneuver, flying back from the slaughter field of the front to save the infantry. He'd been unhorsed in the brief but fierce fight in the flank, continuing to fight on foot. It had taken a dirk in the gap in his armor under the armpit to take him down, but even then he'd buried his battle axe into the skull of the man that killed him. His brother had found them there, the Tarth knight's hand still on the dagger in Morgan's side and Morgan's hand still on the axe buried in his killer's forehead. Bauman Bayich had lost his own mount to a levy spear, remaining in the vicinity of the Stormlander lines for the battle. But he had seen his baby brother race back to the infantry. When Morgan didn't come back, Bauman had gone to find him. Aelor wished it had been someone else who had come across the young knight, if only for Bauman's sake. The middle Bayich was openly crying, caring not a whit if other men saw him as he cradled his brother's lifeless body. Lord Clayton stood stony-faced a few feet away. The eldest hadn't had the relationship with his youngest brother that Bauman had. But blood was blood, and Aelor knew the man was suffering. The Dragon Prince stood beside Sir Barristan and Alaric, watching the heart-wrenching scene in front of him with his helm in his hands. "It's my fault." Barristan Selmy shook his head. "Men die in war, your grace, friends and foes alike. I rushed in like a fool and had my flank turned. If Selwyn Tarth hadn't have been outnumbered 2-1, we'd all be dead now." Sir Barristan's voice turned firm. "This is not the time for self-pity, your grace. We were outmaneuvered. But their losses are far greater than our own. The important ones got away. We annihilated hundreds of Robert Baratheon's men. That was our goal in marching here and we achieved it. Yes, we were outflanked, but we learned from that and we move on." Aelor was quiet a long moment before clapping his mentor on the shoulder. "Thank you, my friend." Aelor turned away from the harrowing scene in front of him, unable to bear Bauman's tears any longer. "If that was Rhaegar, would I do the same? Would he for me?" Aelor didn't know the answer, and that disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Renfred rode up then, dismounting a different horse than the one he'd rode at the start of the battle. The castle opened her gates as soon as the battle ended. It was manned only by a skeleton garrison with no sign of Lord Musgood or his family. They never intended to hold out. Aelor nodded, taking the waterskin his friend offered and taking a long drink, only then realizing how thirsty he had become. Their entire goal once we arrived was to hold us up just long enough to get the nobles and most important knights back on the galleys. It worked. What are our losses? The Lord of Hollard Hall grimaced. Close to 600 of the infantry including the wounded, less than half of that for the knights. He gestured towards the bawling Bauman. Morgan. Aelor only nodded, unable to voice the confirmation. Rickard cursed under his breath before continuing his report. "We're not yet sure of their infantry numbers other than that almost of all those who had been on the field are dead or captured. They couldn't have been more than 2,500 if that. There was 200 knights thereabouts in their flanking force, all are dead." Aelor shook his head in disgust. "They took more than 3 times their number to the grave with them, as well as running off half my levies. An impressive feat, I'll admit. Even if it was against me, we give them each proper burials." Rickard nodded. "Of course, your grace. I'll need a count of how many men I have left. I'll have Sir Barristan send out a few parties to return my panicked levies, the ones they can find anyway. We rest at Drake's Grave tonight, move the camp up." Rickard bowed his head. "It will be done." The big man remounted before smacking his breastplate. "Strong shield." Aelor returned the gesture. "Stronger sword." Renfred hesitated just a moment longer. "All men must die, Aelor, such is life." Rickard turned his horse and galloped away before the prince could think of anything to respond with. "Alaric," the Dragonlord said while summoning the langward lad with his hand, his squire stepping up from where he had dutifully been waiting. The boy's shaggy black hair was soaked with sweat, and Aelor could see his hands trembling with the retreating adrenaline in his veins. But Alaric had managed to hold on to his lunch this time, and he stood tall and straight. Aelor handed him the waterskin, and Langward drank gratefully. "You did well." Alaric shrugged once he lowered the waterskin from his lips. "You told me to stay with you, your grace." The prince grinned for the first time that day. "Aye, that I did. You ride well and you're good with a lance." The squire responded as all young men did to praise, his chest puffing out as he tried to fight back a smile. "Thank you, your grace. I'll see if Sir Barristan will assist with your swordsmanship training, and I'll get you a set of proper armor as soon as I can on 2 conditions. Your grace, you keep both me and yourself alive long enough for me to fulfill that promise." Alaric grinned. "Of course, your grace." The dragon of Duskendale nodded. "Good, now go and assist Lord Rickard in moving the camp. I'll be reviewing the castle." Both of them swung onto their respective animals. Alaric had only just sped away when the sound of someone calling his name captured his attention. Aelor turned his stallion around. Shit, he was getting attached to the beast, and saw a messenger weaving through the mass of bodies both dead and living. "Prince Aelor," the man called again before pulling his lathered, exhausted-looking horse to a stop beside the Dragonlord. "News from your scouts. Robert Baratheon is marching." She missed Aelor. Elia Martell knew the Seven had to frown upon her for that. It was Rhaegar she was supposed to miss, the Prince of Dragonstone, heir to the Iron Throne and father to her children. But all Elia felt when she thought of her husband was anger and heartbreak, so instead she thought of his younger brother. They'd received word from the Stormlands, both from messengers sent by the Dragon of Duskendale and from Varys and his spiderweb of knowledge. Aelor had scattered a Stormlord host at Bronzegate, capturing Lord Buckler and various other nobles and knights. He'd slaughtered another at Drakesgrave on the shore of the Narrow Sea, though Lord Selwyn Tarth and his advisors had eluded capture. Elia hoped her good brother kept himself alive, for he seemed to be the only hope for the Targaryen dynasty. While she was a Mardel, her children were dragon lords, and their safety and well-being were the most important things in the world to her. Right now, it seemed that safety and well-being rested on Aelor Targaryen's shoulders. They'd received word from elsewhere as well. Her youngest brother Oberyn was currently in the Boneway, having been ordered by Aelor to prevent Baratheon from avoiding him by fleeing through Dorne. Elia knew her hyperactive brother would be chafing from both being ordered and from missing the combat taking place, but she knew he would follow the Lord of Duskendale's command. Oberyn and Aelor had struck an odd friendship, the Red Viper much more fond of the second Targaryen than the first. Elia had once worried that Oberyn craved a more intimate relationship with the son of Aerys. She was fully aware of some of her brother's taste, and had worried about how Aelor would react should her brother try something. But Oberyn seemed to understand Aelor was as straight as an arrow, and their friendship was just that. The Dragon of Duskendale had also been correct about Hoster Tully's intentions, it seemed. Various spies had reported that the Riverlander had managed to marry not only his supposedly grief-stricken eldest Catelyn to her dead betrothed's brother Eddard Stark, but also his youngest to the elderly Jon Arryn of the Vale. The three regions were amassing at Riverrun, their presence a constant dagger pointed at King's Landing, a dagger pointed at her children. Robert Baratheon was the only wild card. The last word from the Dragon of Duskendale was that Baratheon was moving towards Storm's End, and that Aelor was taking back to the field to meet him. Mace Tyrell was moving the main body of his force to try and pin the stag between the Rose and Dragon, while his vassal Randall Tarley was moving his vanguard to close down the Kingsroad to King's Landing. But even Varys wasn't sure just where the rebellious Lord Paramount of the Stormlands was. Well, Elia supposed he wasn't the only wild card. No one knew where Rhaegar and his 3 Kingsguard were. For not the first time, Elia was grateful for the constant presence of Sir Manfred Dark. He was as mean as he was ugly, and neither the overly sensual Talana Vaith or gorgeous Ashara Dane had been able to flirt so much as a smile out of the squat knight. It was abundantly clear, however, that he was as loyal a man as ever lived. Aelor had ordered him to protect the royal family, at least most of it at all costs, and protect the royal family he would. Of course, no one on earth could protect the queen. Rhaella Targaryen was pregnant again after 3 living children and 8 who didn't survive infancy, her belly already beginning to swell. Elia believed that unborn child and young eccentric viceroys were the only thing keeping the haunted woman alive. It had disturbed Elia to no end when she'd first married Rhaegar, and heard her good mother's desperate pleas for help on the occasions Aerys took his rights as her husband. It infuriated her that Rhaegar did nothing while his mother suffered so, but she'd soon learned that no one could. Not the Kingsguard, not Rhaegar, not even Aelor, who had always been more hot-tempered and challenging of his father's eccentrics. No one raised a finger to the king. Princess, sounded the breaking stone Manfred Darker used for a voice. A letter for you. Elia smiled at the broad man. Thank you, Sir Manfred. He extended the letter in one hand before opening his other, revealing a tiny doll. This, the big knight said, clearly uncomfortable holding something so small in his huge hands, came with it. Elia couldn't help but giggle at the sight of the monstrous man holding a doll. Her mirth grew even more when the man blushed. Talana and Ashara would be devastated when they learned a doll had managed a feat neither of their feminine wiles could. The Dornish princess ended the man's silent suffering and took the proffered doll and parchment, breaking the seal bearing the warring dragons of Aelor. Ah, just who I was thinking of. The prince's writing was physically narrow but emotionally broad, able to convey a broad range of emotions with mere words if he so chose. Rhaegar was the true poet, of course, able to bend words into marvelous arrangements. His poetry and singing was what she had loved most about him. But while Aelor couldn't carry a tune, his writing, despite being only half as poetic as his brother's, certainly reminded her of Rhaegar. Elia, this may come as a surprise to you, but I have a new doll for your daughter. I found it in the chambers I commandeered at Drakesgrave. I suppose it belonged to one of the Musgood girls, but it belongs to Rhaenys Targaryen now. Call it dishonorable thievery if you will, but I'm sure your daughter won't see it that way. I know Sir Manfred has you well taken care of, but I worry for you and your children's safety, as well as my mother and Viserys. Keep Aegon and Rhaenys close to you. This war is the greatest threat to the Targaryen dynasty since Demon Blackfyre and Bittersteel, and I fear more lives will be lost during its course than even the Redgrass field claimed. I beg you to remember that Sir Manfred is your bodyguard. Please, for the sake of the 7, let him guard you. I killed a boy today. He was a squire no older than 13. It wasn't even a true battle, just a skirmish trying to throw me off of Robert Baratheon's true force. He thrust a spear at me, hoping to gain fame as the slayer of the Dragon of Duskendale, I suppose. Before I even knew what I was doing, I cut his throat. A boy, one not even old enough to have felt a woman's touch. Now all he'll ever feel is the embrace of cold clay. I didn't feel a damn thing after I killed him. No remorse, no sadness for the death of one so young. That is what terrifies me. Give my niece and nephew a hug from me. I pray that I'll be able to do it myself someday soon. And I pray that the Aelor Targaryen that returns to King's Landing, if one even does, is at least a tiny bit similar to the one that left. Aelor Elia didn't know whether to smile at his gift or frown at his words. Aelor's care for his niece and nephew had always been touching. It didn't surprise her at all that Aelor would even use a war to find more dolls for Rhaenys' already impressive collection. Then again, his statements about feeling changed worried her. Elia knew men changed in war, but this seemed something more. Elia didn't want Aelor to turn away from the good man he was at heart. The seven knew there weren't many of those around, especially in positions of power. The Dornish woman presented the doll to her daughter, a lump forming in her throat at her delighted squeals. Leah pulled her into a hug, the lump growing larger as Rhaenys threw her tiny arms around her mother's neck. It had been a long time since Leah Mardell gave in to the need to cry. The urge had been with her for months now, but she had never given in. But when the first tear cut a trail down her coppery cheek, she couldn't stop the dozens that followed. The lions of Lannister were on the move. Sir Loren Lannister didn't consider himself a true lion. No. He was more of a domesticated cat, lazy and capable of only so much harm. In truth, even that was a stretch. He'd never harmed a fly despite his knighthood. One should equate him to a kitten. Yes, a plump, harmless kitten. Many men would be ashamed of themselves if that was how others, and even they themselves, looked on them. Loren, however, knew it was the truth, and since he was happy in such a life, he saw no shame in fully accepting it. Tywin Lannister didn't know the first thing about Loren, and the latter was more than okay with that. The Lannister patriarch was cunning and ruthless. Loren was at best an average mind, and he hated death and everything involved with it. Sure, Loren looked the part of Lannister, sporting shaggy blonde hair and emerald green eyes and a well-sculpted face, but Loren was several stone overweight due to his excessive drinking and gluttony, squandering whatever blessings his prestigious bloodline had granted him. No, Tywin Lannister wouldn't like him. Best to remain anonymous. Besides, retaining anonymity wasn't hard for Lannisport Lannister. There were hundreds of them after all, each one descended from a king. Some claimed to trace their ancestry back to the last king of the Rock, a different, more lion-like Loren. Others claimed it all the way back at Lan the Clever, the first Lannister king. Loren didn't know where the hell he came from, and he didn't care. His ancestors couldn't buy him a drink. The army of the West had been camped at Casterly Rock for Loren didn't actually know. He'd been drunk most all of the time. They'd abruptly packed up and started marching after. He didn't actually know why they had moved out either, or how long they had been gone, or where the hell they were going. Loren Lannister truly didn't know much. Loren Lannister, came the guttural voice of Piss. Loren really didn't know much. The man was a Lannister, at least he knew that, with golden lion heads for shoulder plates. He grew his blonde hair long, his face a permanent scarred scowl. Tall and lean, he looked the part of a warrior. In other words, he looked the exact opposite of Loren. If he were an envious man, he'd be jealous, but of course it took effort to be bitter. That's me, Loren replied as he took another swig from his chalice of wine. The warlike Lannister before him raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? The last time I checked, yes. War Lannister shook his head, permanent scowl deepening. Bloody shame. You're expected at the War Council. Well, that was a surprise. Loren didn't know the first thing about war. Granted, he was a knight, but that had only happened during a particularly long episode of drinking with a few captains of the Lannisport City Watch. A few bought drinks and well-placed jokes, and next thing Loren knew, he was Sir Loren Lannister of Lannisport. Me. War Lannister snorted. You. Why in the seven hells would I be there? Upon seeing you, I have no idea. I doubt you'll be much good. Politically, however, it's required you show up. You're the head of one of the Lannisport families. Oh, that explained it. This was all a mistake. Loren took another swig of wine, much more relaxed with the prospect of actually being expected to contribute to society out of the way. No, you have the wrong Lannister. That's my uncle Tybolt. Tybolt is dead. Oh, well then it'd be my cousin Lan. He's dead too, died just yesterday of a bloody cough. Really? Well then. How about Lancel or Lucien or War Lannister cut him off? Enough. My brother told me to fetch you. Without further ceremony, he reached down and seized Loren by the collar of his breastplate, pulling him to his feet before the drunken lion could react. Unsure how to respond, Loren did the only thing he knew how to. He brought the chalice to his lips and drank. War Lannister knocked it away, the goblet bouncing away and spilling all its glorious contents onto the ground. No more, you're drunk enough. If you come in still drinking, my brother will have you walk all the way back to Lannisport. From the look of you could use it, but my opinion doesn't matter. Grab your sword. Distressed over his wine but even more wary of what this War Lannister might do if he didn't obey, Loren fumbled around for the blade he couldn't ever remember even so much as unsheathing. Without a word, War Lannister turned and walked out, Loren following for fear of not. Tywin Lannister's pavilion was as great as the man himself seemed to be. This temporary structure nicer than half of the permanent homes in Lannisport. A long table, oaken and sturdy, was currently seating 20 war advisors. At the head of it sat the man himself, bald of head with bushy golden side whiskers just beginning to turn silver, his presence commanding even when he was silent. Loren took the farthest available seat he could find, if he was going to have to be. He was damn sure going to make sure he wasn't noticeable. Loren was a drunk and he knew it. He had no intention of firstly offering bad advice and secondly getting killed for it. Tywin Lannister spoke first. From what Loren had gathered, the man did everything first. What of the second son? A burly man with a rearing purple unicorn on his doublet spoke from a few chairs away. House Brax, Loren remembered to his own surprise. Reports place him still in the Stormlands, chasing Robert Baratheon. Another lord, this one with a peacock and a name that escaped Loren, took the narrative. Prince Rhaegar still hasn't been seen. Aerys has pulled the Crownland lords not with Aelor into the capital. Brax finished. No more than 2,000 or 3,000. Tywin Lannister's nod was so minuscule Loren was fairly certain he had imagined it. And of the Reach and Dorne, War Lannister spoke up then, still trying to help Aelor trap Baratheon. TITKE. The name sprung unbidden to Loren's mind, and suddenly he realized that War Lannister was none other than one of Tywin's younger brothers, the more martial of the three. Good thing I obeyed. Word is he's as dangerous a swordsman as Aemon the Dragon Knight. Another Lannister, probably Kevan, the second eldest of the sons of Tytos Lannister, sat at his brother's right hand. The Vale, North and Riverlands are all amassing at Riverrun. It won't be much longer before they march. Tywin Lannister's baritone could silence a mounted charge. Not that Loren knew anything about those really, it just seemed to stand to reason that they would be loud. Personally, he hoped he would never find out. We must reach King's Landing before they do. Ah, we're going to reinforce the capital. Good on us. The Targaryen dynasty was once great enough to bring the Lion Kings of old to their knees, but no longer. Aerys has spat upon the Lannister name too many times. Oh, we're going to attack the capital. The day was full of surprises, it seemed. But Loren thought, at least he thought it until he found the entire table, Tywin Lannister included, was suddenly staring at him. Well shit, there went my disappearing act. Loren dare not look at the emerald green eyes of Tywin boring into him when he blundered on, completing his thought process verbally. But who will be king? War Lannister Tyget spoke over the angry ramblings. He is Lan's cousin brother. New to the council, despite his defense of Loren, it was obvious Tyget didn't care a whit for him. When Loren finally managed to look at Tywin, he could tell the man wasn't impressed either. That was fine, the chief Lannisters could despise him all they wanted to. All Loren cared about was making sure they didn't kill him. Robert Baratheon has the best claim through his grandmother, Rhael Targaryen. I intend to turn King's Landing and the bodies of Aerys and his family over to him with the suggestion he marry my daughter. But Baratheon is betrothed to the Stark girl, Loren remembered, though Tywin had turned away from him in clear dismissal. That was fine. Loren hadn't dared ask the question on his mind anyway. We have to consider, Brax began, Loren fascinated by how much the man's mustache moved when he did so. The possibility that Baratheon doesn't escape the Stormlands. Lord Peacock nodded. Those two certainly like to talk. I prefer wine myself. He is surrounded by 4 armies and the Targaryen prince is no fool. A new lord, this one with a red bull on his chest, made his voice heard. Targaryen is a boy, yes, a boy who hasn't lost a battle. He's only fought 2 in a handful of skirmishes, Lord Serret, and he's outnumbered the enemy 2 to 1 in them all. Brax came to Serret's defense. That may be Lord Prester, but he rides with Barristan Selmy. Randall Tarley is in command of one of the Reach armies. Lord Peacock, a name Loren much preferred to Lord Serret, had an arrogant voice. The more Loren heard it, the more he wished to drown it out in alcohol. And reports claim he has killed more men with his own hand than any man in his army. Tyget Lannister snorted in derision, something he seemed to do quite regularly. So what if the whelp is good with a blade? That makes him a killer, not a strategist. Men rally to a warrior if he continues to rout his enemies. Enough. While it wasn't quite a mounted charge, Lord Lannister's voice certainly stopped his vassals cold. Our sack of King's Landing will draw the Targaryen lad north into the jaws of the other rebellious lords. If Baratheon has any wits about him, he'll use the opportunity to escape. If he doesn't, we will react accordingly. Now out, all of you. Loren didn't need to be told twice, as he rambled his way back towards his tent. Loren thought on the task that apparently lay before them. He'd been blissfully unaware of it mere hours earlier. With the help of the copious quantities of wine in his tent, he'd soon be ignorant of it again. But during the agonizingly long trip to his beloved wine stores, the idea that he was marching to commit treason ran through his mind unhindered. Tywin had claimed he was going to present Baratheon with the bodies of both Aerys and his family. Didn't that family consist of a child or 2? Maybe it was 3. He vaguely remembered some talk of a new prince, Aelin or Aeger or some other such Targaryen name. Surely the Lord Paramount of the Westerlands didn't intend to slaughter mere babes, did he? The Rains of Castamere suddenly began playing in his head, and Loren realized that yes he did. That seemed particularly unknightly. Granted, everything Loren did was unknightly. But he'd never once considered the murder of children. The idea that he was marching forward to do just that didn't settle well with him. For the first time since he didn't know when, Loren felt something very close to a moral conscience. He blamed it on his level of sobriety. Gods, did he need a drink? Aelor Targaryen had never been particularly passive in nature, his temper as hot as the blood of the dragon coursing through his veins. And he was as wroth as he had ever been in his life. His stallion thundered underneath him, its huge lungs working like a billows as it raced towards the sound of slaughter ahead. Alaric had taken to calling the stallion warrior, a name Aelor was certain the High Septon would disapprove of, but that fit the massive destrier like a gauntlet. The beast seemed to love battle almost as much as Aelor did, having emerged from the slaughter of the Straits with a red muzzle from where it had bitten hunks out of the Stormlander enemy. While it was particularly unwise of a knight to grow attached to his mount, as more horses would die underneath him than women would writhe, Aelor found himself liking the animal more than he did most men. But right now the dragon of Duskendale wasn't focusing on things he liked. No, right now he was focusing on his hate, and there was certainly plenty of that to go around. The Lannisters hadn't left many men guarding the mud gate that lead to the Rose Road and Southern King's Road. They clearly hadn't felt the need, as no one was supposed to know they were marching on King's Landing with the intent of sacking it. But Aelor Targaryen did know, thanks to the chitterings of a little bird that had appeared in his tent the night before he was to assault Robert Baratheon, and while he hadn't been able to reach the city of his birth in time to prevent the start of the Lannisters' pillaging, he was certainly in time to prematurely end it. Aelor Targaryen was going to kill them all, each and every one. He drove his lance through the throat of the first man he came to, turning the guard's shout of warning into a gurgle of blood and death. The others fared no better, one turning and trying to flee through the gate but instead being trampled by the mass of armored horses crashing through. The streets of King's Landing were awry with soldiers and citizens both dead and alive. Some men in the red and gold of House Lannister were battling with those in the gold of the City Watch or the red and black of House Targaryen, blood being spilled onto the already red streets. Others had given up the pretense of waging war and were openly looting, the city's wealth being stolen from brothels and seps alike. Aelor drew his sword, the ruby in its crossguard glittering, and cut into them like a demon from the deepest of the seven hells. His men knew their commands, and they would carry them out with gusto. They were to kill every man in Lannister red they came across. There would be no chance of redemption, no declaration of repentance. There would be no mercy. The lion had bitten the dragon's tail, and it was going to be burned into black and nothing for the offense. Some knight with a purple unicorn surcoat tried to knock Aelor off of his destrier, the dragon prince driving his sword through the narrow slit of his visor in response. Aelor roared as the lust of battle flooded his veins, withdrawing his blade from his dead enemy's face only to plunge it into the back of the next man at arms he crossed. Aelor didn't give a damn whether it was an honorable blow or not. He just wanted to kill, and whether he did so by cutting off a man's head and killing him instantly or cutting off a man's hand and letting him bleed to death on the shit-covered street mattered not a whit to him. Aelor had gotten good at killing. He intended to get much better. The deeper he drove into the city, cutting a bloody path up the streets of his family's capital, the more Lannister red he saw and the more his rage grew. Warrior felt his rider's fury and responded, his frequent neighing sounding more like a predator's roar, running more than one man down and turning them into a fleshly pulp underneath the stallion's hooves and weight. The black-armored knight and black-hided horse made a terrifying duo, spilling blood as if they were the embodiment of the stranger. Even those Westlanders who had sense enough to run could not escape, feeling the bite of a blade or the crushing clamp of a set of flat herbivore teeth digging into their skin. Men died by the score, and still the Targaryen prince drove on. Whether Alaric or Sir Barristan were still beside him, Aelor couldn't say. Whether Lord Randall Tarley had successfully brought the infantry up to block off the city's gates, ensuring not a single Lannister would escape the purge of their own making, Aelor didn't know. The Lord of Duskendale didn't even know if this euphoric slaughter was real or just the dream of a man from a family known for its madness, dark and terrifying and beautiful. Aelor didn't care. All that mattered was killing and the Red Keep. When Aelor came upon a man in a lion's helm, his shoulder pads forged to look like the faces of the predator the Lannisters were so proud of, all of his rage focused on that one being. This knight was atop a horse almost as big as Warrior, the long blonde hair that flowed from underneath his helm waving to and fro as he tried to set up a defensive line. His men weren't listening, too intent on the loot they were pillaging, and the women they were defiling to worry about something so trivial as a war. Aelor ended his efforts for him. Warrior crashed into the Lannister's mount, nearly unhorsing the knight as the stallion beneath him staggered sideways. The second son of Aerys brought his blade in a downward angle, hard and fast. To his utmost surprise, the Lannister knight parried it with his own, forcing Aelor's blade up and away as the lion's horse regained its balance. Warrior, enraged that the other stallion in front of him hadn't gone down, slammed his armored body back into his rival's flank, sinking his teeth into the blanket of heavy mail covering the Lannister horse's haunch. Aelor used that momentum to strike again, his own fury growing as the Lannister parried once more, knocking Aelor's blade aside and going on the offensive even as his mount staggered again, screaming hauntingly at the pain Warrior was inflicting. The lion's blade crashed into Aelor's shield, the sword slashing a furrow into the warring white dragons painted onto the heavy oak and banded steel. Aelor had almost forgotten the thing was strapped to his left arm. He hadn't needed it to this point. The dragon swung the newly rediscovered defense out, knocking the blade of his opponent away, and once again struck, this time aiming the point of his sword at the slit in the man's visor, intending to skewer the lion's brains as he had the purple unicorns. Lannister managed to block this blow as well, not giving up a fraction of a second in transitioning from the defensive to the offensive, slashing his blade in at Aelor again, carving another groove into the dragon's shield. On and on the two danced, parry being met with parry, their stallions warring with each other every bit as hard as their riders. Thrice Aelor thought he had an opening, and thrice the Lannister knight managed to close it off before the dragon of Duskendale could drive his blade home. Their deadly dance paid no heed to the carnage around them or the passage of time. Blade meeting shield meeting blade. Aelor roared as Lannister landed a blow, the tip of the lion's blade catching Aelor's helm, carving through the steel with the strength only battle lust could give, biting into the skin around Aelor's right eye and setting his helm ajar, his vision blocked. The dragon roared in fury and pain, the lion laughing as he aimed his sword for a killing blow. Warrior saved him, at that moment driving his muscular shoulders into his rival's flank again. The lion's laugh turned into a curse as he had to regain his balance. In that time Aelor Targaryen had removed and discarded his helm, the gash that carved diagonally from his right brow over his eye and sliced cleanly until it ran off the point of his cheek bleeding freely. Violet eyes, both unscathed despite the mess of blood surrounding the right. Burned out from a face twisted in anger. The dragon of Duskendale looked nothing like a man in that moment. As he raised his sword, thundering out a war cry of rage and pain and hate, He looked more like a fire-breathing bringer of death than even the white dragons etched onto his breastplate. This attack was twice as furious as his first, the dragon swinging hard enough to nearly break the lion's shield arm when he met the blow. Whatever momentum Lannister had won with the blow that nearly blinded the prince was lost, and soon he was barely able to ward off the deadly blade of his opponent. The dragon prince seemed to be growing only stronger, bloodlust fueling his every strike, his unshielded face snarling as he struck again and again. In truth, the lion could only hold off the dragon's onslaught so long. One parry was a fraction too slow. The weak counter knocking the prince's sword aside but also knocking the lion's blade away. Before he could bring it back, the dragon of Duskendale had thrust his sword forward, driving the point of his blade through gorget and chainmail, unleashing a roar so vicious one would think he was a dragon reborn. The lion never cried out in pain, as silent and sullen in death as he had been in life. TITKE Lannister only twitched twice, blood running in a torrent down his breastplate, before falling backwards as stiff as a tree, sliding off of both Aelor's blade and his own battered and bleeding horse to land in a crimson and gold heap in the street. The gold of his shoulder plates made a sharp contrast to the blood-soaked filth, long blonde hair turned red and brown. Aelor Targaryen gave his dead opponent only the briefest of glances before he kicked Warrior back into a sprint, thundering up the blood-soaked street for the Red Keep. The fighting hadn't quite reached the fortress of his ancestors, the drawbridge up and nervous men manning the battlements. One man was so tense from waiting for an enemy that had yet to arrive that he had drawn his bow and loosed an arrow before he truly saw the figure riding towards him. His heart nearly burst when he saw that figure was a Targaryen prince, face, armor and stallion all so bloodied as to almost be unrecognizable. The archer fell to his knees in relief when his hastily shot arrow sailed well wide of his target, the man never so glad to be a lousy shot than he was in that moment. "It's Prince Aelor. Hold your arrows. A friend, hold fire." Each of those cries and more echoed through the line of men holding the walls. "Open that gate, let the prince in." Cut through the mass of voices and men rushed to obey. The dragon of Duskendale galloped through the rapidly raised portcullis, not slowing as men at arms in the courtyard had to leap out of the way of his charging animal. The keep seemed untouched, the whirlwind of death Aelor had unleashed on the Lannister rear having seemingly saved the inhabitants. Aelor rode hard anyway. Tywin Lannister was smart. He knew that the only thing that would keep many of the defenders fighting was the lives they protected. If he could slip a few men into the keep and eliminate the Targaryens inside, most would lose heart, ending his brilliant sack of the city with the termination of most of the bloodline that had insulted him repeatedly over the years. Aelor knew the murder of children like Aegon and Aelia wasn't above the lion. The reins of Castamere began playing in the young prince's mind as he neared his destination. They have to be alive. They have to be. I must see them. I must hold them again. Aelor came to the dry moat defending Meager's holdfast, finding the drawbridge up and men, the last line of defense for the Targaryens inside, tense and ready. "Lower the bridge," the dragon called, the blood flowing down his face to mix into the silver of his beard. A knight Aelor didn't recognize with a leaping swordfish on his chest peered down from the walls nervously. "But Prince Aelor, the king demanded we open for no." "Lower the fucking bridge," the prince bellowed, and within a second the sound of turning gears filled his ears. Aelor thundered across the drawbridge almost before it even settled into place, flying under the ingress and into the courtyard. The dragon of Duskendale flew off of his stallion, barreling into the castle within a castle. It was then and only then that he realized Sir Barristan Selmy, white cloak and armor turned red and Alaric Langward covered in gore were beside him. "Barristan, check Rhaenys' room and then my mother's, Alaric with him, find my family." His companions gave no argument, Sir Barristan turning a corner with Alaric close on his heels. Aelor himself ran like a madman, paying no heed to the sting of the cut down his eye. All that mattered was reaching the nursery, was seeing that Aegon and Aelia and Rhaenys were alive, holding them in his arms and seeing that he hadn't been too late. When the dragon prince reached the nursery, too focused to even notice his lack of breath, the door was already open. Aelor burst in, hoping beyond hope to see his favorite Dornishwoman and her children safe and sound. Instead, he was greeted with the sight of a mountain with legs and armor, a massive surcoat bearing 3 black dogs on a yellow field stretched across the broadest chest Aelor had ever seen. Aelor followed the surcoat up and up and up until he was staring at the biggest man the dragon of Duskendale had ever heard of even so much as existing. And the blade, as long as Aelor was tall, that the moving mountain was swinging towards the dragon prince's head.